Welcome to the individual version of the Lab Design tool. In this video, you'll learn how to quickly and easily design, layout, change, and save digital twins of your labs. Let's get started. After signing up for a free trial, log into your account to begin using the Lab Design tool. Once logged in, you can access the Lab Design tool using the Your Labs button here. The first time you enter the Lab Design tool, you'll be prompted to create your first lab space. Give it a name, and optionally select if you'd like to start from the example pre-configured lab. Make sure to also select your desired unit of measure, but this can be changed later in the settings menu. Click and drag to create a wall in your new lab space. Walls can be created at any angle, but if their angle is close enough to being perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical, they will snap to that axis. When you release your click, you'll see some new options appear over the end point of your new wall. You can click and drag this bottom handle around to further adjust your wall point. You can use this top delete button to delete this wall point entirely. And most importantly, you can click and drag from this button on the right to create a new wall that starts from this point. By doing this again and again, you can easily create multiple connected walls. Walls that you create will also snap to align vertically or horizontally with other existing wall points, making it easy to line up your walls to create a completed room shape. There's plenty more adjusting that you can do to your lab space's floor plan, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's try adding assets to our lab space. Assets can be added to your lab space using the asset palette on the right side of the Lab Design tool interface. The possible assets you can add to your lab space are presented in this scrolling list. You can access different categories of assets using the buttons at the top of the asset palette. For instance, this first page lists equipment assets, while this next page lists generic assets, and so on. You can use the search page to search through all of the available assets in the Lab Design tool. Or you can use the search fields on individual asset pages to only search for assets of that page's category. Once you've located an asset you want to add, click and drag it from the asset palette to bring an instance of that asset into your lab space. Alternatively, you can just click and release on an asset in the palette, and an instance of it will be added to the center of your viewport. You can click and drag any asset in your lab space to move it around. You can also rotate assets by clicking and dragging on the rotation handle that appears when an asset is selected. You can rotate an asset freely using the inner circle, or snap your rotation to helpful values using the outer circle. Most assets will be placed onto the ground in your lab space, but some assets, especially the ones in the Doors and Windows page of the asset palette, are meant to be placed on or inside walls in your lab space. Wall assets will snap to or in walls when moved close enough to one. Now it's about time we talk about this window at the bottom left that you may have already noticed. This is the real-time 3D preview window. As the name suggests, it shows a live 3D preview of your lab space that updates instantly whenever you make any changes. You can resize it by using the handle on its top right corner, or expand it to be full screen by using this Maximize button. As the navigation tips window in the corner also explains, you can look around your lab space in 3D by clicking and dragging anywhere on the screen. By default, you'll be viewing your lab space from a bird's eye view perspective, but you can dive down to a first-person perspective by clicking and holding a location on the floor. Once here, you can look around like before, or click and hold a different point on the floor to move there. If you'd like to see more or less of the scene when viewing it in a first-person perspective, you can change the camera's field of view using this button in the top right corner. you can exit the full screen real-time 3D preview using this minimize button in the top right. If you want to call attention to a specific first-person view in your lab space, you can add a first-person viewpoint from the Camera Objects page of the Asset palette to your lab space. This will add a flag to the real-time 3D preview that, when clicked, will bring the camera down to a first-person perspective at that exact position. The default angle of the view will align with the view cone that you can see in the first-person viewpoint icon here. You can rotate the first-person viewpoint to change this default angle. While the Lab Design tool has a sizable library of 3D assets to add to your lab space, if you'd like to add a representation of an asset that doesn't exist in the Asset palette, you can use a generic asset located in the Generic Asset page. Generic assets are highly customizable. You can resize them using the transform handles seen here, or you can use the various functions of the Asset Control panel that appears whenever any asset is selected to edit it in all sorts of ways. You can give the generic asset a unique name by typing it in directly to the left side of the Asset Control panel. This name will appear on the generic asset in both 2D and 3D. You can also access the Asset Edit menu using this button here. In this menu, you can type in exact values for the asset's dimensions, give it an elevation if necessary, or change its color. Assets aren't the only things that are highly adjustable, though. Your entire floor plan is also very customizable, even after drawing your initial walls. The final page of the Asset palette here is the Room Details page. This allows you to set or adjust the default wall color, the default wall height, and the default floor texture of your lab space. But you can override these defaults on individual walls if you'd like. Clicking on any wall in the lab space will select it, and allow you to adjust its position and properties. Using this handle here, you can move an entire wall around. When a wall is selected, you'll see this Wall Control panel appear at the bottom of the screen. From this bar, you can delete the wall using the Delete button, or access the Wall Edit menu to adjust the wall's properties. From this menu, you can change a wall's thickness, or change its height to be different than the default, or change its color to be different than the default, or even hide the wall completely. While a wall is selected, you'll see a button appear as you hover your mouse over it. By clicking and dragging from this button, you can add a new wall that's connected to the currently selected one. Using this feature in conjunction with the Add Wall button on the Wall Point UI allows you to quickly build rooms inside your lab space. At any time, you can also click on any existing wall point to select it and edit it using the same options as before. Let's talk about some of the items on the top bar of the Lab Design Tool UI, starting with these buttons on the right. These are the function buttons, and they define how you can currently interact with your lab space in 2D. The function you'll use most frequently is the Move function. While this function is active, you can select and move assets, select and adjust walls and wall points, or just click and drag on an empty spot in your lab space to move the viewport around. The next function is the Add Wall function. This function allows you to click and drag in empty space in your lab space to add a brand new wall, which works just like how adding the very first wall to your lab space did. The Lab Design tool will switch back to the Move function as soon as you finish creating your wall. The next function is the Tape Measure function. This allows you to click and drag to measure a distance in your lab space. This will remain persistent in your lab space and can be moved around by clicking and dragging it, or deleted using the Asset Control panel. And lastly, there's the Marquee Select function. I'll add a few more assets to help show this one off. The Marquee Select function allows you to click and drag a box around a number of assets to select them all simultaneously. While multiple assets are selected, they can be moved together, rotated together, aligned using the Align menu in the Asset Control panel, duplicated, or locked as a group. Now, if I try to select any of the individual assets in the group, it will select the entire group together. They can be ungrouped using the Ungroup button in the Asset Control panel. Now onto the buttons in the center of the top bar. This is the Undo button. It will reverse any action taken in the Lab Design tool. These buttons on the right side are the Zoom buttons. They adjust the zoom level of the 2D view of your lab space. This one zooms in, this one zooms out, and this one resets the zoom so that your entire lab space fits inside your viewport. If you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, you can also zoom in by scrolling up, zoom out by scrolling down. Lastly, we have these options on the left of the top bar. The Open button opens a window that lists all of your lab spaces, and you can select any of them to be viewed and edited using the Lab Design tool. The New button allows you to create a brand new lab space, showing you the same options we saw earlier. The Settings button will open the Settings menu, where you can adjust the number of global parameters for the Lab Design tool. The first option is a drop-down to change your desired unit of measure. This next option toggles collision detection in the Lab Design tool. In your lab space, if an asset intersects another asset or a wall, it will be highlighted red to indicate a collision. You can toggle this behavior on and off using this checkbox in the Settings menu. Lastly, there's an option to toggle snapping in the Lab Design tool. While this option is on, assets will snap to the edges of other assets and walls when they are moved close enough together. This allows for easy, precise alignment. This behavior can be toggled for an individual asset using this checkbox in the Asset Control panel, or toggled globally using this checkbox in the Settings menu. If you are trying to match your lab space with an existing floor plan, you can use the Trace Floor Plan Image feature to easily align your digital lab space floor plan with the real floor plan you're trying to emulate. It's best to use this feature starting with a fresh, new lab space. First, you'll need to obtain a digital image of the 2D floor plan in either JPEG or PNG format. Then, click on the Trace Floor Plan Image button in the top menu bar, and that will open a file selector where you can select and load your 2D floor plan image. From there, follow the instructions to align your floor plan image correctly. First, find a distance reference on your image that you know the real-world size of. Then, line up these flags with the beginning and end points of that distance, and enter that distance in the given box. Next, set an opacity for the overlay image. This can be changed later. Now you have an overlay of the desired floor plan that is correctly scaled in the Lab Design tool. From here, you can begin creating walls and adding assets accordingly. At any point, you can use the Edit Floor Plan Image button to change the scale or opacity of the floor plan image overlay. You can even turn the opacity all the way down to 0 to hide the floor plan image entirely. Using the plus button on this menu bar, you can add a new tab to your lab space. Tabs are essentially variations of a lab space. Every tab will have an identical floor plan, meaning the exact same walls and wall points, but they can have different configurations of assets. When creating a new tab, you'll need to give it a label and decide which existing tab should be used as a base, or you can just start with an empty lab. Lastly, you can decide where your new tab should sit in the tab order. Right now, since we only have one tab, our new tab will have to be placed after this first one. As you can see, the new tab has the exact same walls as the first tab, but any asset adjustments I make in this tab will stay in this tab. The first tab is the only tab where the lab's floor plan can be edited. And any changes made to walls or wall points in that first tab will be carried over to all other tabs. Licensing for the lab design tool is based on lab floor area, meaning the total square feet or meters of all of your lab floor plans. Adding additional tab variations won't skyrocket your lab floor area usage though. Only the first tab's floor area will be counted towards your total. On the home page, you can see your current lab space usage totals. If you're running a little close to your limit, you can delete lab spaces you no longer need to free up some space. You can do that by going into the tool, going to the Open menu, selecting a lab space, and clicking the Delete button. For any technical support questions, check out the Community Support Forum. If you don't see a solution already posted that solves your issue, post a new question to get help from power users and the Lab Design Tool staff. Now it's time to get started on creating your own lab. Log in to develop a digital twin of your lab today.